What's the craziest thing you've heard someone say after they thought the phone call had ended, but they forgot to hang up? I was the third party in this. A coworker failed to hang up properly after a conversation with the boss and promptly went on a very creative, expletive-laden rant about the boss and what he should do with himself. As this went on, I received a text from the boss suggesting I should inform the coworker that she'd not hung up. I got coworkers' attention and told them they hadn't hung up. Still in expletive mode, I was asked what made me think that. My response was, I got a text from boss. First time I ever saw color literally drain from someone's face. Next day, my friend called me for a quick question, followed by an ass exploding in a toilet before he hung up. Was not the type of friend to do that sort of thing, so it was hilarious. Story 2. I had a job where I was in a position to write off a substantial phone bill, which the customer said was because her mother was dying overseas and she had dementia and needed to hear things in her voice to believe anything, including doctor's instructions. She was heartbroken and sobbing about how if she had the kind of money to pay this phone bill, she would have just gone back to her country because the flight would have cost less. She was right about that. I wrote off the entirety of the phone bill. She cried like a jilted lover in a rom-com and said, "People like me are angels from God, etc." After I wished her a good evening and she thought the call was ended, she says to someone in a perfectly normal voice, "Well, that worked." Story 3. I work at a children's hospital, and anything serious like a code blue is called out hospital-wide over the loudspeakers by dialing a specific phone extension. There's been a few times where someone hit the hold button instead of end call, and the whole hospital gets to listen to the hold music until someone catches it. The worst, funniest, though, was a couple weeks ago. Every single employee, parent, and child in my world-renowned children's hospital heard this poor guy scream when he realized he was still on. Comment: I was in a remote work conference call, which was interrupted by the unmistakable sounds of a person performing their first and second necessities on the toilet. It went on for some time, and at the moment of the flush, the meeting organizer circumspectly said, "Everyone who is not speaking, please go on mute." Suddenly, a person yelled, "Fuck!" and dropped from the call. The meeting chair was trying to be a bro, because with all the other unmuted people and mild sounds of chirping birds and typing, we didn't yet realize who it was, and we only identified the dumb sap by the sound of his voice and the "toilet boy is leaving the meeting" notice. Poor guy never lived it down. Story 4. I was FaceTiming my parents shortly after I started dating my now wife. I'd had quite a dry spell and hadn't dated anyone for a couple years, so I mentioned we were dating on the call and they were happy for me. We ended it and I just put my phone down to grab Sogrugsing without ending the call. Apparently my mom did too, because after a few seconds I heard her say, "Well, I'm glad he's having sex now." Awkward, but also I'm glad my mom is looking out for me. Story 5. We hired a clown for our daughter's 5th birthday. A few days after the party, he called and left a message on our voicemail regarding some matter, but he didn't hang up the phone properly, and you could hear him restart his video and go at it until the message limit was hit. Needless to say, we didn't rehire him. Story 6. Stupid fell for it. This from a student's parent while I was excusing their kid from an assignment they missed because their grandmother just died. She hadn't. Still, the kid wouldn't pass the class under any circumstances because he was a complete. Once I talked to his parents, I knew why. So he still failed the class, even without the assignment. So I know one of us was the stupid, just not sure it's the same person they think it is. Story 7. Business conference call, the other side had asked some pretty stupid questions, but was still poised to do more $1 million worth of business with us. Thinking the call had ended, one guy in the room started calling them ducking idiots and talking about how what they were trying to do was never going to work, etc. They didn't say anything else, but we all heard the sound of the other side disconnecting, and they later reached out and said they were going to go in another direction. Story 8. My MAL had a new boss who hated her. She was about 3 years from retirement, and she felt like he was trying to push her out early so she'd lose part of her pension, etc. She asked me to check her answering machine while she was gone after her mother died and let her know if anything important came in, and to water her plants. The third day or so I'd been there was a message from this boss giving his condolences. Then you could hear the click where he thought he'd hung up, but must have placed the receiver just wrong and was still on the line. He ruthlessly made fun of her with his wife for the next 5 minutes before saying, "Oh, crap," and hanging up. She was at a really low point in her life, and I didn't have the heart to tell her or leave the message on the machine. It would have absolutely crushed her, but I did record it, and then I deleted it from her machine. Then I called that git and told him what I had, why I wasn't telling her right now, but absolutely would if needed in the future, and told him I'd better hear nothing but how wonderful work was going for her and how well she was treated until she retired. I told him I didn't even understand what a piece of crap you had to be to talk about someone like that behind their back, and especially at such a time in their life. And that's exactly what happened. She had a wonderful last few years and figured that her mother dying had opened him up to treat her kindly and with respect. That was 20 years ago, and I never told her, and never will. I wouldn't want to ever take those last few years there away from her. Story 9. I worked in sales inbound call and had a pleasant conversation with a customer who politely declined the offer and told me she was going to look elsewhere. We said our goodbyes. Nothing out of the ordinary. Really sweet lady had called in with her husband. As soon as she thought she hung up, she slammed her phone down and starts yelling at her husband. Damn, company name. Are you crapting me right now? $350 a year? I'm not paying that much for this goddamn piece of shit product. How the duck could that bitch pitch that with a straight face? I gave her the decency of hanging up myself after that, but she was 100% in the right being pissed. Ha ha! Inbound means she called us to update, not the other way around for those confused. I said she was justified because the company sucks bananas. It was exactly what she called in for, just with a price increase she wasn't expecting. Story 10. I have a not muted story. WebEx, 500 people on the call, right when everyone was getting used to working remotely. Westcourt Set It Up didn't mute the audience by default. The chaos was amazing. Dozens of people simultaneously unmuted and going about their lives. Dogs barking, kids crying, kitchen utensils clanging, the call leaders pleading for people to mute themselves. My favorite part was when they had things mostly quiet. About 5 people were still unmuted, including one guy who thought he was muted who yelled, "Jesus Christ, people! Mute your ducking phones!" before realizing he was not on mute. They threw in the towel and ended the 1.5-hour meeting after 15 minutes. Story 11. Worked at a call center years ago and a customer was kind of panting, trying to sound normal at the same time. As soon as convo ended, they thought they hung up and they just went full on hardcore moaning and dirty talk with their partner and continued what they were doing before answering the phone. What boggles my mind is the fact that he answered the phone to begin with. One more story. This time, someone from a call center called me. Some lady called, and from her voice, you could tell she's a hefty type of gal. Her voice was the heavy breathing type when she talked. Anyway, call ended, but I didn't press end call since I assumed they would. They didn't. And this lady talked about fried liver and onions to her coworker, and the way she talked and gushed over it made it sound so sexual, but in a disgusting way. She said she has it at least once a day as her meal. She made slurping sounds and some type of moaning sounds talking about it. Never felt so disgusted in my life listening to someone describe food. Story 12. Not quite the same, but my parents told me a story about a long-term house guest that was problematic and difficult. When she finally walked out the door, apparently the relief was so great that my parents and older siblings started dancing around declaring happily, "She's gone, she's gone," only to look up and see her standing in the doorway again. She had come back in to retrieve her umbrella by the door and had heard everything. And that's why for many years my parents would joke, "Don't forget your umbrella," to departing guests. Story 13. Grandma left me a voicemail asking for my help with stuff on her computer. She thought she hung up, but she didn't, and I hear her call me a Haven't really talked to her since. Story 14. Not sure if this fits. I sat in on a remote interview. We were in the conference room with 2 screens, one showing the interviewee and the other showing us. Nearing the end of the interview, I noticed my boss had seemed to develop an unusual neck spasm. He would face the screen, then suddenly look to the side, then face the screen again. At the end of the interview, as the candidate was exchanging thank you, etc., I leaned over and asked if my boss was okay. His answer was just loud enough to be picked up by the microphone. If you twist fast enough, you can see your own ear. Needless to say, the job offer was not accepted. Story 15. My father-in-law, who is 86, can't work his phone too well. He always gets phone calls at dinner time. So once a week when he is over, he gets a call. And it's always from someone different. 9 times out of 10, he makes a smart remark about not liking them. 8 times out of 10, he hasn't hung up yet, but thought he did. Story 16. Last year, my job was monitoring call quality, so I would usually listen to phone agents in real time. In one instance, there was a caller that was simply not understanding what was being said. After the agent got off the phone with him, there was a 3-second window where I can still hear the agent scream, "Jesus, Kim!" Didn't mark them for it as the call had technically ended at that point. Another time where someone placed a caller on hold, but because of how the phone system works, I can hear the agent even if the caller is hearing music. She placed the caller on hold to call her sister and plan a vacation. Story 17. Mine was a butt dial, not a failure to hang up. My parents are divorced and remarried. When I was 17, I lived with my mom and would see my dad on the weekends. I knew that my dad and stepmom were possibly trying to have kids, but they hadn't really said much to me about it. I got an accidental call from my dad while they were breaking the pregnancy news to my stepmom's parents. I answered, and I could hear my step-grandmother saying congratulations and we're so happy for you both. I listened for a couple minutes and was able to put together what the congratulations was about. My dad and stepmom told me about the pregnancy the next time I saw them, and I acted surprised. I didn't want to ruin it for them. I didn't tell them until years later that I had found out about my future brother from inside my dad's pocket. Story 18. Not really crazy, but my grandparents would always call me from 2 different phones in their house so we could all talk. When they'd get my voicemail and leave a message, instead of hanging up, they'd talk to each other. Usually silly things like, what's for dinner and stuff like that, but it always made me smile. I wish there had been a way to keep them back then. Story 19. I called a service provider who was supposed to order certificates of good standing from a state, and they were late in sending them over. They told me there was a delay at the state's office and gave me a new estimate. They forgot to hang up, and I heard them telling their coworker that they'd completely forgot to send in the time-sensitive request in the first place. Never use them again. Story 20. My crazy mother had called me while arguing with my stepfather. He was a truck driver, and she would frequently go with him on his routes and just leave us at home alone. That's a different story. At this point in time, I was about 11, and my mom had called me on our landline while she was arguing with my stepdad. This would happen frequently. He would accuse her of sleeping with other men. Other dumb crap, which wasn't the case. He was the one sleeping around while on the road. And she would call me and my younger siblings on the phone to vouch for her as if we weren't just innocent children. Well, this time she was screaming and crying like a madwoman while on the phone pleading my stepdad to not leave her. Blah, blah. This was a very traumatic time. But now looking back as an adult, I feel nothing. They were adults acting like imbeciles. Well, they continued arguing on the phone. I said my part, told my mom to calm down when they were coming home because we needed food, etc. Frequently, we would be with no water light. It didn't matter to them because they were constantly on the road and could eat, shower at the truck stops. So who cared about us kids, right? Our only meals were the ones at school, and I would dress and get my siblings ready. No other adults in our lives ever even suspected a thing, which is so sad looking back. I guess I was no help on the other side because she seemingly hung up the phone, but I could still hear them arguing. I then heard my stepdad say, "I can't stand those ducking kids," which my mom replied to with, "You don't like kids? You don't love my kids? I want to be with you. I'll kill them if you want." That moment left me frozen, and after that day, 13 years ago, I never brought it up. But in those passing months, I definitely had trouble sleeping, always thinking our own mother was going to kill us at any given moment just to make an abusive, disgusting excuse of a man happy. I've never brought it up to any of my siblings or to anyone in my life in general until now. They are still together, still very much abusive to each other. When I hear them yell now as an adult, it triggers my flight or fight, and it's like I'm taken back to when I was 10 again. But now I'm able to snap myself out of it and realize I'm an adult and their decisions can't hurt me any longer. But when I see them both, I think of that phone call. It gives me goosebumps sometimes. I guess I'll never understand how a woman, a mother, if I can even call her that, would be willing to threaten, give up her own children just to please a man who does nothing but treat her like crap. They are both abusive to each other, so I will never understand why they enjoy living this way. They both need help. I have forgiven her, though, even though she's never apologized for a single thing. I bring up a lot of traumatic things that have happened, and she always claims I made it up, just a child's imagination, and that my childhood was good. It gets exhausting arguing, so I've just let it go. My only gain from the past is knowing never in hell do I ever want a man like that, or to have children that would live through Saarbrüchsing like that. She taught me what kind of woman I don't want to be, and I'm grateful for that. Story 21. I was working in a call center for some time, so I'd be calling around 30, 40 people per day, which is exhausting work. There was this one particular call I still remember very clearly. It wasn't crazy, but the situation was rather unexpected. So, I'd be calling a woman about the end of her 30s. We'd have the usual chat, and she was readily replying to my questions, sometimes giggling and doing conversation outside the topic at hand. She was in a room with her daughter. When we ended the chat, I thanked her for her time and said my goodbye. A few seconds after that, she apparently thought I had already hung up and said to her daughter, "My goodness, he's got the most pleasant voice." I was smiling beams for the rest of the day and did enjoy the work much more for the rest of the week. Story 22. I was at a bar with some friends when one of the guys was guiding about his long-term GF to us, which is fine. That's what friends are for. To the bartender, whatever. He gets paid to listen to people get, and he couldn't care less. To the girl he was attempting to hit on, which is not so Grügsing, we've seen from him before. Then his GF called him to ask so Grügsing real quick. He answers her question, then puts the phone down and turns to the girl saying, "See, that's what I'm talking about." Not only can she not duck, but she can't figure basic things out for herself. That's why I want out. I want a girl who can think for herself, and a girl that can duck right. Wink. Side note. The thinking for myself thing was so Grügsing he overheard the girl had been saying about herself in an earlier conversation with her friend about her career path. I look down and see the phone screen still on, the timer still counting up. I nudge my friend and nod towards the phone. He picks it up confused, thinking someone must have called him or so Grügsing and said hello, but only heard a click. Later that night, he got home and rightfully found all his crap in the yard. 4-year relationship ended over it. He called me at 3 a.m. asking if he could crash at my place. Of course I let him. I'm not going to let a friend be literally stuck out in the cold. He stayed for a week while I helped negotiate the breakup to keep it as amicable as possible, as someone trusted by both parties. I helped make sure he could collect his things without her having to be there, and did my best to be the neutral third-party arbitrator. After a week, he moved in with some other people, and I told him that while I'm glad I could be there for him in his time of need, the need was self-produced, and that I could no longer be friends with someone who would be willing to treat other people the way he did that night at the bar. He was shocked, but it's so grugzing the rest of our friend group discussed, and none of us were comfortable with. Story 23. My best friend at the time had been conducting a year-long prank on me in middle school, when I was too stupid to know any better. She claimed to have a brother that had seen me on campus and had a crush on me. She did a very convincing voice impression of a guy and would hand off the phone to her brother when I would call sometimes. She was living with her grandparents while her other siblings, 2 sisters that were real and the brother that wasn't real, lived with her mom. So when I went over to visit, I never saw him and never suspected a thing. One day I was talking to this fake brother, and it was starting to get a little intimate. I was a romantic. What can I say? He abruptly tried to end the call and thought he had when I heard my best friend say, "That was close. She almost got me." I proceeded to correct her and didn't talk to her for months. Later on, due to other events I won't get into, I suspected she was a lesbian who actually had a crush on me and was in denial. Don't know where she is now, and it's been years since I've heard from her. Story 24. In the early days of Facebook, my former father-in-law was just discovering it and connecting with old friends. He was having fun seeing who gained weight, who got divorced, who's a millionaire now, and so on. One guy he connected with gave him his phone number, so Phil calls him. He didn't answer, so he leaves a message, so grugzing, like, "Hey Bill, it's been a while, just wanted to catch up. Give me a call back at asterisk phone number asterisk," and then hit the end button and jokingly said, "And I heard you got fat." He then looked down, and to his horror, the call was still active and recording the message, so it probably sounded like, "And I heard you got fat." Oh, crap. Oh my God, it didn't hang up. Duck it, still wrecker, click. To my knowledge, dude never returned that call. Story 25. My phone was in my hand when I got a call from a friend. He wasn't expecting me to answer that quickly. The first thing I heard was, "Oh yeah, duck me in the ass, baby." He's still trying to convince me he was just joking around with his girlfriend. Edit. I meant joking around, not fooling around. I'm still learning idioms. Story 26. Found out I was single this way back when I was in the army. I got the chance to call my girlfriend and took it. It was a nice call. She told me what she'd been up to and all that. We made plans for some leave I would be getting soon. We said goodbye and she hung up. I still had a few minutes, so I just sat there, holding the phone so the next guy wouldn't hassle me for it when I hear from the line, male voice. "So when's he coming back?" Ex-girlfriend. "Not for a couple of weeks. We have plenty of time." MV. "You're going to break up with him before that, right?" Ex. "Of course." I hung up and felt like crap. Ghosted her when I went on leave. Later found out she's been seeing the other guy for a while. Didn't see her for years and years until one day. I was taking my kid to get pizza at a place in a strip mall, and there she was, standing next to an SUV, staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. I waved, went inside, and that was it. Story 27? This wasn't a phone call, but happened as I was leaving a potential rental. I was looking for a place to rent, met the property manager, and she walked me to the unit. It wasn't the best neighborhood, and my mind was already made up as I was walking around the property with her that I wasn't going to go through with it. But the lady was very nice and friendly, and I figured I'd at least take a look inside the unit. It was small and dingy. I looked around and told her nicely that I'd think about it, and then walked out. After the door closed, I could hear her screaming, "No, you fucking won't! Fuck! Oh, I'll think about it and let you know. Ah, fuck!" Certainly glad I did not rent. Story 28. I have a friend that is awesome to hang out with, but she can be super flaky. Her brother was dating another friend of ours, but they lived in Thailand together. The mutual friend was home for a bit and was heading back the next morning, so we met up with a few other friends. The flaky friends said they would be there, but flaked. When I called to see if we could get a hold of her, it went to voicemail, and I thought I hung up. Instead, she got a voicemail of an exasperated me saying, "She always ducking does this. I don't think she shows up more than a third of the times we make plans." She confided in me a year later that she'd got it, but thanked me because she said she hadn't realized how bad she'd been about keeping plans. The voicemail had her reflecting, and she started making a point of keeping plans after that. Said it helped improve her depression. I was so embarrassed, but I'm glad there was a happy ending. Story 29. Back when I still worked in a 911 center, I got a call that was pretty obviously a swatting attempt, describing a hellish situation feet from them, but silent in the background. Normal tone of voice, phone not showing remotely near the area they're describing. Note, I started 2 calls, one where they said it was in case it was true, and one where their phone was actually showing with all the details, so we were CYA in case of real issues, but actually investigating what was likely happening. Anyway, after a bit they say they have to hang up because it's not safe to stay on the phone. Then I hear pocket rustling sounds and the same person talking in the background about how that Get Anna is going to get what she deserves when them police show up and point them guns at her, and a bunch of laughing, clearly not meant to be heard by me. So I add that all in too. Anyway, PD found them pretty quick because the area they were actually calling from was very low density population. Hearing them panic when they saw PD outside of their house was a special kind of fun. Story 30. Had a boss take a phone call while he was going through drive-thru. Me and a female colleague were talking to him. He told us he had to order, then apparently forgot we were still on the line. He said the female coworker I was with was only good for her giant tits, and she needed a good banana to lose her attitude. There was someone else in the car with him, apparently. She left the company, but I hear she got a handsome severance package. Story 31. A colleague of mine dialed into a meeting of 2. 3 managers plus about 25 sales reps only for everyone to suddenly go quiet, and for one person to tell him the meeting was canceled, and he could drop as they, the sales reps, were just chatting sales stuff. He pretended to hang up and stayed on the line. They were basically planning a mutiny because they didn't like that their regional manager was a woman. They had a whole strategy for how they were going to cause a massive duck-up that would cost the company a ton of money and look like it was her fault, so she would get fired. The dumb gits even did a little "are we all in agreement" roll call at the end. We worked in a call center, so his end of the call was recorded. Within a week, every last one of them was fired, and within a month, they were replaced. Story 32. I once worked as a secretary in an office that, for some reason, got butt dialed a lot. During one such occasion, I got to listen in while some gentleman from New York absolutely roasted one of his employees. Well, what the duck do you expect me to do? Honestly, Tom, if it wasn't for the fact that I'm had kex with your sister, your ass would be out of here right now. Story 33. I was leaving a message for a client about data conversion services. After I left the message, I thought I had hung up VoIP software on my work computer. I started singing the Mana Mana Doo Doo Dodo, the Jim Henson song, then noticed I hadn't hung up. So, I hang up. The next morning, I come in to check the conversion voicemails, and there is a very clear and professional message left from the client. He leaves contact number and says to have a nice day. There's a short pause, and then he sings the same song back in the message, looking up where I hung up, when I realized I was still on voicemail. It was hilarious and made my day. Story 34. I was doing some stuff for work and had submitted a quote using my work account for some parts. I also used their services for personal projects at home with a different account, but somehow they connected the two and had called my personal cell phone to ask me questions about my professional order. Anyways, obviously I didn't answer the phone and it went to voicemail. The woman left a kind message about the issue, and then there was a click and another 2 or 3 seconds of silence followed by "answer your ducking phone." That was followed by another 2 or 3 seconds before the line disconnected. I called them back and asked why they were contacting my personal account for an order submitted with different contact info, etc. Also let them know that maybe you should make sure you've hung up before cursing at me. Edit for clarity. Story 35, not me, but a friend of mine called up the bank to deal with some screw-up on their part. After a few minutes talking to the agent on the phone, they say, "Just give me a few moments to change this on the computer," and goes quiet for a minute. Then my friend says to me, "Oh, so she's going to give me the old put them on hold until they hang up trick now," at which point the agent says, "Sir, I'd never do that to a customer. Whoops." Story 36. So, this was a few years ago. Freelance work wasn't doing great, so I was applying for any job I could find. This was in Italy, BW. I had a job interview scheduled on Skype. The job offer was pretty vague, but I had nothing better to do, so I gave it a shot. 5 minutes into the call, I realized that it's an obvious pyramid scheme. I let the guy finish the introduction of his pitch. Then I say, "No thanks," and hang up. He must have thought he had closed the call, or perhaps Skype glitched. Not sure, but I could still see him looking disappointed, and I could still hear sounds on his side. I heard the unpleasant voice of an old lady come from off-screen. She had clearly been there the whole time. And the dialogue went so groogsing like this. He didn't fall for it? Nah. Then the call finally ended for real. Story 37. I got a call from one of my 3 least favorite patients at a dental office. Her tone was always accusational, even if asking if we're open that day. We hung up and I see her call again on the caller ID. I couldn't pick up because I was now talking to another patient in person. I noticed line 1 is on for a long time, like she's leaving a 5-minute message. I check my voicemail, and indeed I have a long message of her walking around a grocery store with her daughter. She had butt dialed me. I listened to the whole thing and she had been crap talking our office. But the thing is, she kept outlining how we went above and beyond. Oh, they think the problem is resolved just because they called me back 3 times and I didn't answer after I didn't text them back. It was clear we were giving a ton of effort to this patient, and she was unhappy anyway. She thought it made us look bad. About a year later, she transferred Ty another dentist, finally. They asked for records, and I sent x-rays and such. Eventually, she filed a complaint against that dentist. Don't know why. Well, we were asked to provide our records to the state board. When that happens, you dig up everything you possibly can, or it can look like you're hiding sogrogsing. Well, I had saved that voicemail and included it in an MP3 and sent it down on a thumb drive with everything else. I don't know if they even listened to this woman needlessly complaining about excellent service, but I do know her complaint was dropped by the state board. Story 38. I called the housing company that manages the apartment in which I live. After explaining the issue to them, plumbing issue, and that I hadn't heard from them for days after filing the original ticket, that it has been an ongoing issue. The guy on the phone assured me that it would get taken care of. He said "Sagrugsing" to the effect of, "We do our best to handle the requests as quickly as possible. We are always on the side of the tenants. Don't worry, we got you." I thanked him. We said our goodbyes, and he hung up, or so he thought. As I was driving while taking the call, I had him patched through my speakers via my car's Bluetooth. As I'm reaching over to hang up, I hear him yell, ducking tenants. Ducking tenants. Fuck all this. I hear a couple of people in the background laugh and say "Sagrugsing" that I couldn't make out. The guy I had been talking to said "Sagrugsing" like, "The landlord is not going to like this plumbing situation. It's going to cost too much." And this dude keeps filing tickets for the same problem. Landlord is going to freak out, ducking hell. I didn't know what to say, so I hung up. Then I immediately called back, and the guy answered very cheerfully. I said, "Hey, so if the landlord is not going to like the situation with the plumbing, I can always take this to the rent board, file paperwork, and force this issue into a legal matter." The guy was quiet. I said, "I heard what you said. Sucks that you're the middle person, but this is your job. And if you can't be on my side of the issue because the landlord wants to keep costs down, I can always go a different route. This plumbing issue is breaking a couple of rental ordinances, and I have a history of filing tickets for the same issue, only for it to get patched up and not fixed. You let me know what you think I should do." He was sheepish in his reply. "Sorry, man. It's just your landlord has made it very clear that he doesn't want to spend money fixing things in your apartment. Loki, he wants you to move out so that he can upgrade it and rent out for more. And it's stressful because I know you're right, but if the landlord doesn't sign off on the expense, I gotta give you the runaround, and that sucks. But let me see what I can do." A couple of weeks later, the issue was fixed. Story 39. I once got a voicemail from a client at work. After the guy hung up, the VM went on for about 5 more minutes with him faintly talking in the background. As far as I could tell, the dude made a call on his office landline, didn't hang up fully, then called his lawyer on his cell phone. The extra 5 minutes of the call was a faint but bat-crap, crazy, highly detailed discussion of a domestic abuse lawsuit where he was accused of kicking down a door and having a screaming argument where he was throwing stuff at his wife. Story 40. Not me, but a story my parents told me. Here's some quick background information to make this story more understandable. My parents had 3 kids, me and my twin brother and my younger brother. My twin brother has severe autism, and I don't. We are fraternal. Due to his autism and just us being kids, the 3 of us were pretty difficult to deal with. Also, it should be noted that we were pretty messy. Anyways, back to the story. So we had this babysitter. I guess she thought she called her friend because my mom received a message on her voicemail that went so grugsing like this. "These kids are absolutely horrible. They are disgusting and awful, and they don't listen. The whole family is disgusting, and I hate being here, and I also hate this family. These kids are spoiled and disgusting and terrible. This is the worst family." Anyways, I guess my mom heard this message as it was happening and picked up, and when the babysitter realized what had happened, she quickly hung up. I mean, what she was saying about us being horrible and disgusting is probably true, but still, we were kids, and my twin has severe autism. Story 41. This is kind of funny. So I called one of my coworkers to ask him about work in the after hours from my cell, which he did not have because it was my second week there. He answers, and all I hear is, "Yeah, get? You like these ducking hairy balls? You like these balls in your mouth, you ducking escort?" Then I heard the phone beep, which I assume he tried to hang up, but maybe pressed the wrong button, and I hear him say duck wescort for called. "I'll duck and kill all of them." I go, "Alrighty then." 1 whole year goes by, and I never bring it up. One because of embarrassment, like maybe he was cheating on his wife, or maybe he accidentally answered the phone or whatever. But we start becoming friends, and he invites to a BBQ, so I ask him about it finally. He's starting cracking up, like hardcore. He said during that time he was out with his friends, and some spam caller had called him for the past 2 days nonstop, and he thought that's who I was and wanted to troll him. Funny AF. What a legend. Story 42? Not crazy at all. But a coworker called to ask me about her schedule. I read off her appointments that day. She said, "Great, thanks, bye." And as she put the phone down, I heard, "Ducking git." I quit that job on the spot. It hurt my feelings because I thought we were friendly, if not friends. Duck you twice, Bethany. Story 43. I was on the phone with my sister. She hung up but somehow failed to disconnect, so I could hear her talking to our mother. It was a half-an-hour conversation bad-mouthing and making fun of me and my wife. I knew they didn't like my wife, but I never expected them to say such vile things behind my back about her and me. I also thought my sister and I had a good relationship, but apparently not. I hung up, called them back, and yelled at both of them. Then I went no contact for a year. We eventually reconciled, but we barely talk now. Story 44. Not hung up, just talked to someone else and thought I couldn't listen. When I was a kid, I phoned a friend to call him to come to my home. So he went asked to his mother, and she called him Angel. And he said, "I'm not an angel, I'm the devil." Then she yelled at him while I pissed myself laughing, figuratively. Story 45. Don't know, but once I was playing Destiny 1 and got a call from my mom, I picked the call without realizing and said, "How obnoxious this woman can be." When I closed it to my ear, I could only hear her with a shy voice say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wanted to know how was your day." I don't know why, but it hit me harder than it should and the tears came up. "I'm sorry, Mom." Story 46. God, he's cute asterisk and asterisk nice. High school landline. In the days when push buttons on phones were a new thing. Sometimes the handset wouldn't settle all the way in the receiver right away, so the call wouldn't disconnect. If the other end hung up, you'd hear a beep, 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 beep after a few minutes. She was in my history class, called to ask a question about a homework assignment, and from the giggling was having a slumber party when she called. I had no idea she thought I was cute, but she sure was. Story 47. I work at support for multiple companies. We are called a managed service provider, or MSP. I get a call that a user can't print from the main printer. So I ask permission to access her system, and she gives the okay. I connect and start looking at the printer and troubleshooting. Her coworker comes in and started trying to do things and is just clicking all over and screwing me up. So I use my remote connection software to lock the keyboard and mouse and continue to troubleshoot the issue. He doesn't know I'm on the phone because he is not listening to her or me talk. So I mute my phone and just let him go. I let out a string of obscenities and calling me a pose-a-meffer and talking crap about how he is going to have me fired for this bullcrap. I simply unmuted my phone and asked him if he would like for me to transfer him to my boss, who just so happened to be sitting next to me listening. She just rolled over to my desk and said, "Hey Bob, knock it off." He got real quiet real fast. Then she called his boss and filled him in on what just happened. He wasn't allowed to talk to any techs ever again. I was always super nice and polite to him when I went on site to work. I could see him dying inside every time. It was great. Story 48. I was wrapping up my work in a small office where we communicated with our field employees by radio. Our assistant manager. I just gotten a call from our new bank representative, apparently a very attractive woman. The put the phone down for a moment while he radioed our owner with the banker's question. The owner responded, "You talking to our new banker?" "Yes." "Tell her if she'll bend over, I'll drive her home." Ha ha. The AM reached for the hold button, but was way too late. Story 49. I was on a Zoom class with my camera turned 0FF, but mic was on. My husband came over to show me a scratch he had on his banana. I said, "Oh no, you poor whiner." The teacher paused his lecture and said, "I'm sorry, was that a question?" I just turned off my mic and never answered. Luckily, it was the final lecture of the class. Story 50. Earlier today, I had a customer think they hung up on me. Then she gets sex her head onto the table. I could hear her calling herself a stupid git and then coughing a whole lot. I listened quietly for a couple of minutes, and then she realized I was still there, and we talked for maybe 10 minutes about her situation and whatever else. Mostly, I wanted to make sure she was okay, and then lighten her mood some before letting her go. She could tell what I was doing, and seemed to be feeling somewhat better by the time I let her go. But damn. Story 51. I'm from the Deep South and have an obvious accent. I called one of our New York City suppliers, and while I supposedly was in hold, I heard one of the salespeople mocking my accent with various slurs and laughing uproariously. As soon as she came back online, I purred in my most southern drawl, "Y'all are fired," and hung up. My boss agreed, and that company lost a valuable contract. Don't bite or mock the hand that feeds you. Story 52. I work for a 911 agency, and we had a caller that was dealing with a heroin overdose. We had a newer employee taking the call. After the call ended, she talked all kinds of crap on the guy that overdosed. Well, he died, and somehow the call ended up being reviewed by someone from the caller's family. What the newer dispatcher didn't know is that our phones can record up to 20 seconds after a call ended. She got written up and had to write a formal apology. Story 53. I was working desktop support for the IT department of my college, my freshman year. I had certs going into college and was hired part-time. I had to call into whatever Dell Enterprise, higher learning support department we used to get some pretty routine RMs or whatnot going for several desktops. So gruxing I had done many times before. The CS rep I reached seemed a bit edgy, perhaps not very bright, and I had to keep correcting him on things while we discussed how I concluded why this or that piece of hardware had failed. After I provided him all of the info he needed, he proceeded to put me on hold, he thought, then screamed profanities loudly about how stupid I was. Presumably to get a laugh out of his coworkers, but probably also because he was frustrated that some 18-year-old kid was having to correct him. Dude sounded like he was in his 30 AS. When he was done, he muted the phone. Cue long pause, as he must have been realizing what happened. He unmutes the phone and very kindly attempts to proceed. I interrupt him and say, "Now that you've gotten that out of your system, I need to speak with Steve." As I see. Steve was the manager over there at that department of Dell. I knew him well. Anyways, that guy ended up being fired the same day once Steve reviewed the recording of the call. Steve told me the guy was in Git anyways. Story 54. Ducking F*** got I hope he fails. It was a Zoom with about 12 people on it. Topic was securing funding for expansions for our partnered media company labels and businesses. I was feeling great since I secured for our company a decently large amount of funding for remodeling the facilities and hiring on more technicians and getting some on-site at workers. I was the last of the group to eventually hang up since I was busy confirming some other info via email. Turns out one of our partners who wanted the same funding but didn't have the revenue and kept complaining about how bad their debt is the entire time really thought they deserved. So they let that zinger fly, and then I also heard a, "Dude, you're still on the call," and then the little disconnect boop sound. We didn't fail. Actually, best year ever. Honestly, don't know if I should have brought it up with anyone, but haven't talked to them since. Story 55. I'm reading this as most embarrassing thing. So the year would have been 1993. I was 12, and my dad had a home office in the garage that he would use for sales for one company and at another time, loan origination. He was leaving a voicemail for a client using a headset, and I walked in and it smelled like he had been excavating his inner arsehole. He said goodbye on the call and he seemed to hang up the phone. I said, "Dad, you're disgusting. It smells like you took a dump on the floor. How many times have you farted in here?" "Dad, well, son, it's that time of the day where the locomotive gets rolling down Colon Station and there just isn't any stopping it." "Me, gross. Dad, yeah? Me, the red light on your headset is still on." His face shows shock and horror, literally the deer in the headlights look. A good 2 seconds goes by and he scrambles quickly to disconnect the call as I'm saying, "No, don't." He hangs up and I say, "Dad, you might have been able to redo the message." Then I bust up laughing and say, "Wow, Dad, we laughed about that for years." Story 56. I work with a guy who used to work in at help desk. He made a habit of muting himself and very aggressively cussing out Westcourt ver. He was on the phone with them, unmuting, acting like nothing happened. I knew at some point he was going to miss that mute button. One day, I'm on a conference call with him, another company, and another individual, director level, within our company, for some troubleshooting. After a bit, we decided to call it a day and reconvene in the morning. At that moment, we heard, "Duck this crap," in which was followed by silence and "excuse me" from the director. After a brief second, he dropped off the call and we apologized. He came in the next morning with an immaculate story about how he spilled hot coffee on his leg and had to drop his pants outside his car. He showed everybody in the office this massive burn mark on his leg. The only interesting thing is that he had been on this call with us for about 4 hours, and he had been away from his home and in his car this whole time with no access to a fresh pot of coffee. If there was coffee in his possession, it was very likely cold by this point. My guess is he realized he had ducked up and went home and staged an injury to avoid persecution, but we'll never know. Story 57. Oh God, the horrible memories. I put my call on mute/video off as I wasn't needed but to listen. In a hurry, I decide to bring my phone in the shower to listen while I'm getting ready for another meeting. Well, the app was buggy, Ring Central, and it was all on. I got clued in when I heard someone say, "Do I hear like shower water running?" And a coworker kindly disconnected me. I talked to her later and she confirmed. Everyone could see my boobs. Vomitous embarrassment. Story 58. When I was at a call center cold calling people during one of my connects, I'm speaking to a seemingly very sweet, if not a little sad-sounding old lady. She very politely told me so, groogsing like, "No, I don't think so, it's just not a good time." And we said our goodbyes, but I'm still navigating my software to hang up. She hasn't. I hear her walk a few paces, presumably to a sink where the faucet starts to run, and then she begins talking to herself. She only says that one phrase over and over, as if she's rehearsing it. "No, I don't think so. It's just not a good time." Over and over in the same cadence and tone for roughly 2 minutes before the creepiness got the better of my curiosity. Story 59 of my file was an independent truck driver. His office was in the home. One night we were staying there when he got back from a long haul. He went to the bar before going home to wind down. He called my mill and she had it on speakerphone because she was cooking. After they hung up, we hear, "Well, that's done. Okay, people, I have $1,000 in my pocket. Drinks are on me." Mill, hubby, and I all just froze. She then slowly put down the spatula, walked in the office, and grabbed the work phone. Phil is just steady running his mouth. Mill had called the bar and asked for him. We hear a muffled, "Your wife is on the phone." She then says very calmly, "There had better be $950 in your pocket when you get home or don't come home, and hang up your phone." She hung up and busted out laughing so hard she had tears. I assume he came home with the money since we didn't hear any argument when he got home. My meal was great, just as calm as could be through the whole thing, then losing her crap as soon as she hung up. Man, I miss her. Rip Mom. Story 60. When I worked at a call center back when iPhones were new, they were a big target for thieves. They would get a hold of someone's account info, always set up a PIN with your provider, and order 6 phones on new lines, the maximum we could send out, and change the shipping address to GE the phones. Any order over 2 phones, and I had to automatically set up an investigation with loss prevention. I went through the whole ACPUNT setup process for all 6 phones. took like an hour, just to hear the git tell his buddy that he thought I was falling for it when I was really setting him up for a visit from the police. One of the only times I didn't hate that job with all my soul. Story 61. I was a third party to this, but a phone order rep at the company was I. The phone with a customer who was complaining about the order had not arrived yet. Why wasn't it expedited? They had not paid for expedited shipping, and being a bit over the top about it all. Finally, the conversation ends, and she hits the button on the headset. This was a headset that had a motorized lever that lifted the handset on the phone and lowered. But sometimes the handset wouldn't be aligned, and so it would lower it, but it wouldn't hand up. She thought it was disconnected and said, "What an ass," then went to take the next call, and she realized what happened. She was super upset, worried she was going to be fired. It was a big customer, but not business ending. She told her boss, he told the sales director, who called the sales rep to tell her, a fiery little woman in Texas, what had happened. The saleswoman called the customer, and he said to her, "She called me an ass," etc. She told him, "Yeah, you can be. Maybe tone it down next time." The customer called back in and apologized to the order rep, and they laughed it out. Moral of the story, there's humans on both ends of the phone. Story 62. When I was in middle school and was on the phone with my friend, his dad came into the room and started yelling at him for not cutting the grass and proceeded to slam the phone down, and I could hear him yelling at and hitting my friend. My friend's older siblings were yelling at the dad to stop, and when they realized I had heard the whole thing, an older sibling freaked out and told their dad that I was still on the phone, and they hung up the phone properly. My friend didn't come to school for about a week after that, and his siblings avoided me the whole time. Needless to say, I told my mama the day it happened, and the teachers when he wasn't in school the next day. CPS was called by my mama in the school. And it turns out the dad was an abusive alcoholic and did a lot of horrible things to those kids. All of the kids got sent to an aunt's house to live, and the dad was arrested for some of the things he had done. As a kid, I felt guilty for telling because my friend was taken away from his dad. His mom had passed 2 years prior. But I know now that they all ended up in a better home where they were loved and not abused anymore. Story 63. Not very crazy, but a little funny. I was an account manager for a company and got a call from a lady at a client of ours who was irate over some issue with our system. I was able to eventually calm her down by just helping her with the issue and keeping calm myself. She asks me a question I didn't know the answer to, so I tell her to hold on and mute her while I ask my colleague, who sat across from me, still wearing my headset. She thought she was on hold, so I hear her talking to someone else and says, "This guy is being so helpful. I was being such a git." Glad she saw it too, Lamau. Story 64. I'm always late to these things. I used to work in a call center. It mostly sucked, but whatever. There's a mute and a hold button. Hold gives them the music. Mute is just silence where they can't hear you. One time I had this lady on the line that just kept going on and on about all her problems and stuff. At one point, I thought I'd hit the mute button, and I plopped my head on my desk and said, "Oh my God, I don't carry." Kind of like Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber. To my surprise, she goes, "I know you don't care, but I'm telling you anyway." And she carried on while I sat there kind of dumbfounded, like, whoops. But she didn't seem upset, and 30 seconds later, she was like, "Okay, thanks again, bye." Click. So a little different, but still funny. Story 65. It was so groogsing, I said, actually. After thinking I'd hung up on my customer, I said, "We'll be making babies tonight. You should really come." It made it sound like I was inviting someone to some kind of Russian roulette to impregnate my wife's sex party sort of thing. Then I heard my customer say, sounds like fun, but no thanks. But in reality, I was telling one of my college students, who wanted to skip class for sugroogsing, to come to the biology lab because we were learning about meiosis by combining little discrete cardboard chromosomes into complete people with various alleles of interest. But that's definitely not how it sounded to my customer. Story 66. My very Christian mother once stayed on a FaceTime call after I thought I had hung up. I had just arrived to my friends to smoke W-dye and gossip about our lastest drama, which included very graphic details of our sex lives and more. She also found out I was sad when I was 14 because of that call. She stayed on the phone for over 30 minutes before I found out. Not great! Story 67. This is a little off topic, but thought people might enjoy it. My dad used to be a coach driver. He once left his phone on in his pocket while doing a job after calling my sister. The radio was on in the coach, and my sister could hear that it was our local station, which Dad often listened to and phoned in for quizzes, anecdotes, etc. She called up the station and managed to get the radio host to make an announcement to tell Dad to turn his phone off live on air. Story 68. Late to the party, but I had an interview over some video call app that I had never used before. I tried the app out beforehand and didn't have any issues during the interview. But when the interview ended, I could not, for the life of me, figure out how to end the dang call. I'd said goodbye and turned off my camera, but even when I closed the app, the audio stayed connected. I thought about saying "so groogsing," but just kept fumbling with the app until it was too late to say anything without it being incredibly awkward. The interview team had stayed on the line to discuss how the interview went, and I heard the whole thing. They said the loveliest things. and it made my heart soar. I was in a really tough spot at a toxic job and without consistent therapy. Hearing these very successful people discuss my positive traits was incredible. The downside was that I had to stay quiet and on the call until everyone else dropped off to remain unnoticed. I felt bad about eavesdropping, but it was a really cool experience anyway. Story 69. I was managing a restaurant, which sometimes is code for I babysat for a bunch of children who don't realize they're supposed to be adults by this point. Habitual problem server calls in to say he's sick and can't make tonight's shift. I know he's bullcrafting, but it's always been my personal policy to not force people to work who don't want to be there. It hurts less to pick up the slack than it does to recover the damage done by apathy. So I'm in the process of filling out his write-up as he's spewing his bullcrap sob story. Then tell him to get better, and we'll see him next shift. I'm still on the phone as I hear, "Holy crap, guys, it worked. I can't believe that git bought it." He had called the office phone, a recorded line. With much pleasure, I simply scratched out the disciplinary action and circled recommended termination as I sent the recording to the GM. Story 70. I was training for the job I'm at. The lady training me put the work phone in her pocket and it hit the page button, which pages all the store phones. It normally presses and then releases after it beeps to the cleared line. Well, this time it held down because she heard herself clearly say, "Son of a git out of the work phone in my pocket." I'm sure everyone within earshot of any of the phones heard as well. She was kinda embarrassed. Story 71. After a business call, we really need their service, and honestly, we can totally afford it, but I'm sure we can chisel the gits down by at least 20%. We were still on speaker at the time, and our company's VP of Sales, Mark, was on the phone and replied, "I'm glad you guys realize you need us, and since you can afford it, why don't we get started today?" Total silence. "Mark, are you guys still there?" "Sure are." "Oh, well, yeah. Well, that was embarrassing. I guess there's no wiggle room on the price now." "No, I guess we're paying sticker then, eh?" "Looks like it." "All right. Well, let me get you over to accounting to get you guys the down payment." "Sounds good. Talk soon." Story 72. A boss, when I was 18, called me an annoying git on the phone after he thought he had hung up. I agreed to cover only 6 hours of an immediate call-in for an extra shift. I left the job and didn't go into me shift knowing he'd have to cover for me. I also sent a letter about my resignation and reason. Heard he was fired a few weeks later. Went from manager to server at his next gig. I got out of the food industry after that. Story 73. Maybe a month or two ago, working as a cook. The kitchen gets a call from Hershey's to ask if there's anything we need to add to our next order. I was just back from vacation, so I put the phone down and went to the office to ask my boss. Boss wasn't available at the moment, so I went back to the kitchen and picked up the phone, where I heard, "Oh, my life is a nightmare," in a very exasperated, yet slightly sing-songy voice. I told her I was sorry about her life, but we'd have to call back. She immediately snapped back into her overly cheerful professional mode and says, "Okay, thank you, sir. Also, I'm sorry about that last bit. If she's reading this, it's all cool. We've all been there." Story 74. I once was going rounds with customer support because of some billing issues with our TV operator. It was the 14th or so time. The customer support guy said, "I'm gonna connect you with the higher-ups," and then forgot to put on hold until we got tired and disconnected. That's what happened the past 13 times. I was recording the call, and I didn't realize it was on hold. I was just playing Clash while on call, with earphones on. Suddenly I hear, "This mother-ducking kid thinks calling us 1,000 times will make a difference, as if we care." Before a pause, a few swear words and disconnect. Showed that recording to my dad, he filed a consumer complaint in the court for fraud and hostile behavior towards the customer. One, got our money back and bills freed and switched TV operators. Story 75. Not me, but my grandfather was on the phone with his mother, and his mother has a sister that was sitting beside her, and when she went to hang up, she said, "Love you, bye," as normal. But she forgot to hang up, and the sister said, "You don't really love him, do you?" To which the mother said, "No, not at all." Unfortunately, she outlived all her kids, but died last year, and I still refuse to call her my great-grandmother. Story 76. This happened to my mother. When I was a college exchange student, I asked my mom to call my home university's housing department on my behalf to inquire about my assigned dorm room for the next school year. You couldn't book online back then, and their telephone hold times were legendary long. To call the university from Germany was way too expensive, so my mom called on my behalf. She explained that I was abroad on exchange, but when the lady out her on hold to check on my assignment, she didn't mute the phone. My mom heard, "This lady is calling for her daughter. When are these parents going to make these kids grow up and manage their own lives?" She then returned and told my mom that I didn't get my first or second building requested. Guess who got their first building and room pick upon returning? Story 77. During the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone was video calling with friends and family, I taught my grandparents how to use Zoom. We spent like 30 minutes Zooming and just chatting. At the end of Zoom call, after she thought they'd hung up, she says to my grandpa, "That was really fun. It was the most wholesome thing I'd ever heard." Story 78. Honestly, she should just kill herself. I'd called out sick, and my coworker called me to leave a message telling me that nobody cared how sick I was. I had asterisk to come in because they didn't want to cover my shift. I'd be taking one of theirs in return. I'd originally felt a little bad, but I'm happy I listened through to the end because duck that, duck him, duck a crafty job, and duck demanding that people who are actively vomiting show up to work in food service. Decided to take the rest of the week, too. Story 79. Craziest thing I said when I didn't realize my toddler had called my mom. I could look into local sperm banks and see how much they pay donors. It's a sacrifice I'd be willing to make. Next thing I knew, I heard my mom busting a gut laughing so hard. It sounded like she was on speakerphone. She wasn't. That's just how loud she was laughing. Story 80. I was having a few friends over, and one of them canceled last minute because his girlfriend bailed. He'd been canceling a lot prior, and had recently told me that she didn't seem that into him. I, a complete git, said to my boyfriend, I wish he'd just accept that she sucks and dump her. And my friend texted me that he'd heard it. I felt so terrible, apologized profusely, and we are fine now. But damn, that was a wake-up call to be a better friend. Story 81. Not me, but a coworker. He was talking to one of our coworkers that was out of town on business. The guy that was out of town did not hang up his phone after leaving a voicemail. It kept recording and recorded the guy doing a drug deal. Ends up, the guy was dealing and running groogs while traveling around the state by car. The dude had been acting weird for a while and everything started making sense. Totally sucked because we found out he went downhill fast. Lost his marriage, kids. Everything. Story 82. On an engineering conference call between JP Morgan Chase, my employer, a security consultancy, and one of Chase's engineering teams in India. One of the Chase middle managers stateside was serious to everyone during the call, flexing his middle manager muscle at every opportunity. He was especially harsh to people on the India team, cutting people off and mispronouncing names he's heard dozens of times. As the meeting ended, the US Chase team hung up. And I think the India team asterisk thought asterisk they hung up. But you could hear the PM screaming in Hindi. One of my coworkers at time was from India and naturally knew Hindi. According to him, the Chase PM said Sugrugzing like, if that albino monkey was in the same room, I would skull duck his mother in front of him and then make him eat my crap. Story 83. Been called in git by a manager at a former job. I was scheduled off that day, so I made plans. They added a shift without telling me, so I didn't show up for it. She called to ask where I was. I told her I was off that day. She goes on about me having a shift on the schedule. Well, I have plans for the day off that I was scheduled, so I won't be coming in. Fine, bye. Starts hanging up the phone. Ducking git. She was a huge git that constantly tried to treat me as her little servant while I was there. I eventually transferred to a different location to get away from her and my ex that worked there. Officially, I transferred because I moved, but no, I liked the location, and my regulars were good. I just couldn't stand working with them any longer. Story 84. This one sticks with me. I asked my mom about one of her friends, and she told me they divorced. Husband was home cooking dinner on a Sunday early evening. His wife went on a girls' weekend. Wife called husband telling him she's on her way home from the girls' weekend and thought she hung up. Well, she didn't, and the wife starts talking to this guy she's been cheating on her husband with and saying how much she enjoyed the weekend with him and that her husband has no idea. Ugh, my heart shattered for this guy. I couldn't imagine the hurt. Story 85. We had a very angry tech named Jimmy. Jimmy also sounded like Lita Ford. We also had a phone system that would occasionally put the phone on speaker when you hung up. One day, a customer called, and Jimmy was working on her computer. The call went so grooksing like, hello, this is Jimmy. Not Jenny Jimmy. I am a man. Visibly pissed off at this point. Call continues and he's getting more and more pissed, but he finally hangs up and says, Jesus Christ, I want to gouge out that gets eyes and skull ducker. Customer on speaker. What? Story 86. When I sold cars, I sold a new Audi Q5 to a doctor on my day off and got a deposit on the phone after being in contact for several months. My manager asked me via text what he looked like so he could recognize him. I accidentally texted my customer instead, Persian or Sogrugsing Middle Eastern. I immediately owned up and told the customer why he got that message and he still bought the car. He was Portuguese. To be fair, some Farsi-speaking employees just started speaking Farsi to him, thinking he was Persian just by looking at him when he picked up the car. Story 87. Not me, but retold from a coworker. His wife works nights and he works days. She gets off of work and calls him that she's going over to console her friend after work. He says, okay, and the conversation ends. His wife then says, well, that was easy. After thinking he had hung up, she was already tipsy at that point. Then he heard her making out with another man. Story 88. I'm a sous chef, and I called my chef one night after he had left because I had some questions about a fish special I needed to order product for. He gave me my answer. And just as I was about to hang up, I heard him say to his wife, no, I'm not going to tell him I was mid-glow job. I hung up, said nothing about it until 2 days later, when I came back from my days off, looked at them both, and smirked with a raised eyebrow. She turned super red and he laughed so hard I thought he was going to choke to death. Story 89. I worked for a professional help desk for a specific industry pretty much everyone has interacted with. So Grugsing and transport. Anyways, was helping someone and they tell me they are going to put me on hold, I say, okay. I hear a button getting pressed, but definitely not the hold button, as she then proceeds to tell her coworker how badly she could use a quaalude, really bad, and proceeds to talk about how awesome they are I were. Also once had one of the older ladies, at least 60s, upon going to hang up telling her coworker how she's seen me before and that I'm cute and she wants to duck the crap out of me. How about, no, not that kind of 60. Story 90. Not me, but coworker at a help desk working overnight. Was dealing with a partner and was on the phone with him for a while. Partner was frustrated that coworker wasn't able to resolve his issue. Not worker's fault, as everyone in the company is aware of the time window you have to submit what this partner was trying to submit. After some time, partner is frustrated and thinks he has hung up. Worker then hears the partner say to someone, "I hope this analyst dies a slow, painful death." Worker then tells the partner they are still on the phone and partner then hangs up. These calls are all recorded. So worker reported call to management the next morning, and partner was then fired after some time. Story 91. I worked at a job where we would frequently have conferences calls on speakerphone with like 5 people in the room with multiple people from vendors. After every meeting, the boss would say, "Goodbye," and wiggle the phone so it made a little shuffling noise and then press mute. Usually nothing happened and the vendors would hang up too. But one time, vendor, "Man, those guys are so clueless. I'm going to charge them an extra 10%. We did not choose that vendor. Story 92. Stop ducking barking. I can't leave a message. Get the ducking dog to stop barking. Asterisk dog's name asterisk. Can't remember. What the duck is wrong with you? I couldn't leave a ducking message. What the duck? Go outside. Asterisk. Oh, crap. I forgot to hang up. Clicks asterisk. It was the funniest thing. My coworkers and I were laughing so hard. We still quote it from time to time. Story 93. Was waiting for a speaker to finish for my turn to address a group of 100 or so employees in a small auditorium. After her presentation, the speaker hurriedly left the stage and the auditorium without passing me her lapel microphone. No big deal. My voice projects. Less than a minute into my presentation, we hear a loud rectal evacuation broadcast over the PA system, followed by a huge sigh and the words, "That was close." After listening to the toilet flush 3 times, we saw her eventually come back into the room and calmly take her seat. Story 94. I used to have a job as a receptionist in a private nursing company, meaning I'd call CNAs all day and make sure they were actually at their shift. One CNA said she was. I was going to call the client to confirm anyways, and thought she ended the call. She didn't. Instead, she said to what I think was her sister, "I'm going to need to score some blow before I go over to client's name's house." Reported immediately, drug test done, fired within a few weeks. Story 95. Someone made an announcement over the PA system that was appropriate. They never hung up and started ordering a pizza. They start reading out their credit card number with all the needed details. They forget to hang up again and start announcing patient identifiers over the PA system. I have no clue how it went for so long, but it was insane. I feel bad for the person on the phone, but feel terrible for the patient. Story 96. I had just gotten a call from someone who I recently sent my resume to, and they took forever getting back to me, and I had already got another job by the time of this call. I did respectfully decline an interview with them, and the last thing I heard from the rep, who I assume was talking to a coworker just before she thanked me for applying word for word, "Wow, this guy's such a git for wasting my time." I was mind-boggled, like, really? I wasted your time after I waited over 2 months for a response from your company? Screw you, lady. Story 97. In my situation, it was more of a failure to mute. I was leading a mandatory 1-hour training for about 25 employees. And near the end of it, we are interrupted by a guy receiving a phone call. He must have turned down the training because we shouted and called his name, all while he told someone on the other line that he could go to the gym after this useless ducking training that he's sleeping through. Story 98. While WFH, I once was on a team call. Thought I was on mute, does that count? And walked downstairs to find my 2 children home from school. The smallest showed me a picture that she did, and I said, "Oh baby, that's so cute," in my most childish dad voice. Needless to say, the whole team, my boss's boss, and even the new starters I was trying to lead with authority, heard it. They remind me once a week about things being so cute. Time to look for a new job. Story 99. Called a friend and was talking to them about the plans for dinner because no one could decide. They agreed to plans and then we went to hang up. I didn't because I was distracted. I hear him say off to one of our other friends with the most disgusted tone, "I ducking hate that git, so ducking controlling." I didn't say anything at first, but when we got to the restaurant and in the middle of eating, he said, "Wow, good choice for food," to me. I just responded, "Really? I know I can be a git and controlling, so I didn't think you would want to admit that." Never talked again. Story 100. Somewhat under the same topic, but had a guy who joined a client morning conference call to kickoff the day from the Porta-John, construction industry, didn't realize his phone's front-facing camera was on, and stood up from taking a crap, only to accidentally show his hog to about 20 Saugrooksing people. Story 101. My friend was dating someone who called him and didn't realize the answering machine had picked up. She was caught on the answering machine talking to someone about how she did not find my friend attractive and that he wasn't funny. He died later that night. It's been almost 30 years and I still miss him. Story 102. Yeah, this was a bad one. This was how I found out a girl I was dating had end-stage terminal cancer. She was on the phone with me as she walked into her gyno appointment, then proceeded to put her phone in her purse. But I think she mistapped or saw Grugzing. I listened to a 30-minute conversation that was TL, "Doctor, you have 4 months to live. There are no treatment options." She'd been aware of it for 3 years, but refused treatment because essential oils can cure any malady. Am I right? Story 103. Not exactly a phone call, but I worked someplace that made announcements over the PA. A captain who had just gotten back from having a vasectomy was talking in great length about how great it was because he could blow my load here and blow my load there and never get her pregnant. An elderly woman passenger comes up to inform us that the PA is on and she can hear every bit of our disgusting conversation. He turned beet red, simply clicked the microphone off and walked out without saying a word. Story 104. I have had a few incidents that all weren't very interesting. One sticks out though. My partner was wondering where the keys to my truck was, and after that, heard them muttering, "Where's the ducking key drawer?" I've never heard that crap before now. For some context, our key drawer is a bin and not a drawer. Story 105. I called a guy who had the 24-hour maintenance contract for my apartment building one evening. His wife answered the phone and said he was out on another job. This was followed by, asterisk, "Did you tell them I'm not here? I can't be bothered to fix their crap tonight, asterisk." Obviously, I told the wife that I was still on the phone and I could hear exactly what her husband was saying.